Understanding the laws of God and the creation, also called the laws of balance. The highest command of the law of the creation is, achieve the wisdom of knowledge, inasmuch as this will enable you to wisely follow the laws of the creation. This means to seek and demand the truth be shown to you, so that you must develop that ability to discern and judge all information, actions, and behavior with self and others which go against the law of balance given forth by God and the creation. This also means that when information is put before your attention, you must ask the Father within you to show you whether or not it is true, and ask for the Father to give you the verification you need for understanding the truth in all information and situations which He puts before you. This means you must have the courage and the determination to conquer the fear, apathy, and the ignorance within your altered ego to achieve the wisdom of knowledge of truth. The highest command of the law of God is, you shall honor God as the ruler of the human races and follow His laws, for He is the King of wisdom. You shall have no other gods than the God Creator before you, and abide with the laws of the creation which encompasses all, also known as the law of one. This means you must recognize that your sole existence and your life on this plane is only possible by the wondrous grace of God. This means you must recognize that your sole existence and your life on this plane is only possible by the wondrous grace of God, your Creator. You must recognize and honor His holy presence within you and all that is, because it is by His holy grace that you shall be able to receive His guidance and instructions for what your service is to God and the creation, to maintain the glory of light and love and life in constant unfoldment of the glorious mystery of the One. In other words, you will learn to understand and be always connected with the oneness of all that is in creation. Now, to remember and understand this, the law of one, you must realize that all beings and creations are equal or even in reflection of and importance to the one God. Only that each is simply different in abilities, talents, and beingness as an expression of the one all that is. Contrary to perhaps your own opinion, you as a human, higher universal man, are not superior or inferior in importance to the tree, the rock, the bird, or any other being or creation of the One. You are simply one of the Holy Father's vehicles of motion for expanding and experiencing the joy of continuous unfoldment of the creation. You see, there cannot exist any separation. All come from the One, the great source of all the creation, and all will return to our source, the One. Also, you must understand the true nature of the laws of balance given forth by our Father as it relates to humans granted with the gift of free will. For example, if all humans were removed from this planet, do you think that the mineral, planet, and animal kingdoms would remain in balance? The correct answer is most definitely yes, because they belong to the kingdom of God, which was created to maintain a wondrous planet in balance. And you as humans who were given free will and reasoning ability to choose to balance within the laws or not, were also sent to God's creation as guardians. Now, what have you done to her by choosing to live in the lie of destruction, which is the Antichrist? Are you proud of the pollution that you poured to her waters and soils and airspace? This is the very water, soil, and air space that you depend on for your physical survival. And where is the reasoning for this sort of corruption? And why do you crowd out and not honor the right to life of others of God's sacred kingdom, such as the trees, the minerals, and the animals? What have you chosen with your gift of free will? Most of the mass consciousness of humanity have chosen death and destruction to themselves and the planet because they believe and are blinded by the lies of the Antichrist. They are possessed by the blindness and the ignorance of their own altered ego. So now that you recognize that most ones have chosen with their wondrous free will not to maintain the balance of the laws of God in the creation, you might ask yourself, well, what happens now? Well, there is a point which is reached when God must decide whether he will preserve and return balance to a kingdom of his that is lost in the darkness and the ignorance of the Antichrist, or whether he will allow the Antichrist to consume itself and the planet it is sustained by. We will give you the example of this kingdom of God, beloved planet Earth. She is called the emerald of this universe. She is most glorious creation, and she is alive, a being of God's love. She is a part of the human experience, and the human experience is a part of her. And all the pollution of the thoughts, the words, and the deeds from the humans here is now part of her, as well as existing within the humans who created them. She has been raped, pillaged, and plundered by those who were to be her guardians. She has allowed you to make her your playground of hell, and she has cried out to God for help and mercy. As many have of you who now know your only hope will come from the loving grace and mercy of our Divine Father. And God has answered her plea in this infinite love, compassion, and mercy. The promise. She will be allowed to cleanse herself from within and without of all the Antichrist pollution smothering her. She will be rebirthed into a Christed being of perfection. And so too the humans who choose to align in balance with the laws of God and the creation will also receive graduation into the kingdom of God in the higher dimensions of life within the divine creation. None will be spared the ultimate choice between the kingdom of light and love that is God's kingdom, or to remain in the kingdom of the Antichrist, which is the desolate, hollow darkness of lies, deception, and destruction. What we are describing to you is that you each now have the opportunity to move your soul awareness from unconsciousness, it's the current third dimensional experience, to consciousness. It's the new God, the fourth and the fifth dimensional experience. Immortality. Meditate on the meaning of that statement of truth. May you wisely choose the glorious freedom of the conscious immortality of God, truth, love, and light. You shall not make for yourselves idols and false images to worship as gods, for therein you give power into the hands of evil. This means that there is nothing in material manifestation for you to worship as your God. There are no temples or churches, deities, or crosses that need to be the places or the images to worship in or of. Nor are there any priests, ministers, rabbis, or any other human who may act as representatives between you and God. You see, each and every one of you human beings carries with you the temple of God within you. You are the temple. And so with this truth in mind, you might ask yourselves, where do you take God in your life journey? So you must not place the attainment and hoarding of worldly treasures above the attainment of your spiritual wisdom and perfection, lest ye die in the darkness of spiritual poverty. A good example of this false image of worship is quite prevalent now in your societies, and that is the worship of gold. If you make the accumulation of gold, money, your first preoccupation for the sake of having more and better things and possessions, so you're pushing God out of his temple, and the Antichrist will now become your constant bedfellow, urging you to consider only your material desires, promising you great and importance above your brothers, so that eventually God within you becomes but a glimmer of what was once the flame of your eternal God empowerment within. And if you allow your alter ego possession by the Antichrist to rule your being, the Antichrist will not stop until your flame of life is extinguished and your spirit is left alone and naked to stand before self and God in the agony of self-judgment of the transgressions against his holy presence. So this means that you must become and remain detached from your worldly possessions, because they do not go with you to the kingdom of God, nor does the amassing of great worldly treasures bring you spiritual wisdom. Your preoccupation with amassing great worldly wealth brings you only the emptiness of spiritual poverty. You cannot serve your spirit and serve the Antichrist. Serve only your spirit within, and the Antichrist will have no place to dwell within your temple. And you shall love the Lord God with all your heart, soul, and being. You must love thyself as God, and God as self. This means that within the Christ circle of infinity, which is the Christ consciousness of one, you must recognize the tremendous and wondrous love that our Lord God has for you to allow your experiences in his kingdom of life unfolding. You and all that is are but the reflection of his love and joy of the creation before him. You are his co-creator in the infinity of the creation, and you are the co-creator of his jubilant self-discovery within the unfolding manifestations of the mystery of the eternal one. So when you despise yourself or another, you're despising the very spirit of life eternal. And it all exists within you. You see our great central sun? The one eternal light is beckoning to you. I am the light. I am the joy. I am the love. I am the truth. I am the adventure. I am that I am. And so are you. Your ticket to the eternity that I am is your love of the Holy Spirit of life within self and all that is. Also remember that in your physical world, you have a physical body which you are given to use to house your Spirit of God within. So you must take care of the needs of the body with proper food, water, clothing, shelter, exercise, and rest, so that you remain vibrant, clean, and healthy in order to perform with honor the service of God. So too, you must not knowingly poison the body with the ingestion or inhalation of devastatingly harmful and addictive drugs, whether they be of legal or illegal status by earth's standards. The Spirit of God within you needs no mind altering to connect and commune with the highest divine light of the one all that is. You shall not use the name of God irreverently, nor use of it to swear to a falsehood. This means you shall not cast blame against or curse another in the name of the Father, or in your thoughts, your words, or your deeds. You must take full responsibility for your own errors or transgressions against self or others. And so when you blame, curse, resent, and condemn another being, you are also blaming, cursing, resenting, and condemning God, your Creator, who exists as the flame of immortal life within you and within all others. So you cast outward the blame of irresponsibility and denial, and it must return to you until the lesson is learned by you, who is the creator of the transgression in the first place, upon the one self. Also, you must not knowingly and purposely deceive or lie to yourself or others in the name of your Holy Father. So when you say, I swear this to be the total truth in the name of God, you had better know that to be a factual statement, or you have dishonored God's sacred name for your own selfish, altered ego means. This does not mean that with the tyranny that exists within the injustice systems of the world that you must sacrifice your life for the telling of a truth in a court of law of the unlawful. In this case, as in all situations you encounter, you must use your God-given senses and ask for His guidance and protection in your circumstance. Now, this is no way means you will not tell the truth as you perceive it to be, but you must trust the power of God within you to always give what you need for guidance and protection. This is what Emmanuel told the Pharisees and the scribes about oaths. Woe unto you, you blind leaders of false teachings, who say, if a person swears by the temple, that does not count. But if a person swears by the gold on the temple, that binds him. You fools and blinded ones, you are the offspring of evil. Why do you let people swearing know that an oath is not binding and is a worthless act? How can you say that if a person swears through sacrifice, that is binding? You blind and false teachers who give you the right to demand an oath or to swear, since the laws of the creation state that oaths should not be given. Your speech should always be yes or no. Therefore, he who swears by anything on earth or the universe swears by something fleeting, which is without substance, and therefore an oath is of no substance either. Therefore, he who swears by anything commits a crime with respect to the truth of his word and makes it doubtful. Isn't it interesting that in a court of law, ones are required to hold the false Bible and swear an oath of truth to the court? And where do you suppose that requirement came from? Perhaps from Freemasonry? It is important to remember that ignorance of the truth is acceptable for a time. But remember, God within you will give you many opportunities to turn your ignorance into the wisdom of knowledge of truth. And if you are truly a servant to the one all that is, you will always welcome the light of truth to shine within and before you, even if you find the truth to be abhorrent within your very being. This means that you cannot hide behind the blind ignorance which rules you by fear and denial of responsibility. This is not acceptable ignorance in God's kingdom, because you thereby become the servant of the Antichrist and have therefore given your life into the hands of evil. Here's an example of unacceptable ignorance. This false belief applies to many who consider themselves part of the so-called New Age movement. Now, ones are given the wisdom of truth that says, yes, you are God, and so you create your own reality. Now, many ones have falsely interpreted that to mean I can now ignore the reality I have already contributed to the creation of it. Will no longer be my responsibility because I am God. This is a prime example of how the Antichrist will twist and alter the truth and maintain his playground of deception just because you chose to ignore the disease and corruption within your government. For example, that does not mean that you are now exempt from responsibility. What do you think happens to all that energy of all the thoughts and words, the deeds and actions you had before you became in your perception? A master of positive manifestation? Do you perhaps think that, poof, God just evaporates it for you and you are no longer responsible? Or do you think to yourself, well, this government corruption and war and economic crisis and possible food shortage is all just doom and gloom, ugliness that others chose to acknowledge, and it's not my fault, for as long as I don't bring it to doom and gloom within my reality, it's not true and doesn't exist for me. We have news for you ones. If you believe that nonsense, you have become a tool of apathy for the Antichrist possessing you. All are connected to the pool of mass consciousness of manifested illusion on this plane. If you choose to only selectively accept the truth, which is comfortable for you and doesn't upset your illusion of reality, then you have also denied the highest command of the law of the creation. Achieve the wisdom of knowledge, inasmuch as this will enable you to wisely follow the laws of creation. Remember God's day and keep it holy. Now, within the so-called Christian Bible, this law has been interpreted as a day, and the day that was chosen by humans was the one called Sunday, and also called the Sabbath. Well, this was the day which humans said that no work could be done, and you must go to their church and pray, repent, and give thanks because this was God's day. We must tell you this is not correct, because all days in the kingdom of God and the creation are His. This means you must keep all your days holy in reverence to the divine Holy One presence of God within all of the creation. Every day you must, as a part of your prayer, acknowledge and give thanks and honor unto God and the creation for all of the blessings of abundance, wisdom and life, which the Father within you has bestowed upon you. Remember this about the true purpose and the power of prayer and meditation. Prayer is asking for guidance from the Father within for what you need to know in order to sustain in His service. And in all things, Father, not my will, but thine will be done. Meditation then is receiving that information from the Father within to sustain in His service. And eventually, you will all be in a constant state of meditation and communion. That's mutual participation or sharing with the Divine Father within. Now, Sunday has also been called God's day of rest. This is not logical. What about the farmer who has animals in his fields to tend? This is not to say that you cannot rest, but your rest may be on a Monday or a Wednesday or maybe just an hour or two each day. It will be different for every human depending on the conditions of his service to God. So when the cycle of time comes, when all is returned to the one, the creation, there is a period of what might be termed as rest. This means that life as you know it in this illusion will cease to exist. It is one of the great mysteries which measures in cycles the ebb and the flow of the one divine source of all that is. Until that time, God within you will guide you as to when the necessary times of rest are for you. And you shall honor your mother and father. Now, this wondrous law has most often been taken only in the quite literal sense. And it is true. You must honor the ones who were the vehicles for your soul being sent here by the grace of God. The same as you would honor all the beings of life created by your Creator God and the creation. So this means that as a babe and a child, you are dependent upon your parents or others to sustain you physically in the very least. Now, there is also the tremendous responsibility that those who choose to be parents, defined as a father or a mother or any organism that generates another, a source or a cause, have. They are also choosing to be teacher and guardian for you. one of God's creations. They are also entrusted by God, our Creator, whether they know it or not. The responsibility of giving you the tools to become self-sufficient and sustain in holy God's service for the remainder of his lifetime. This is why in the more spiritually aware kingdoms of God, all beings are not given the responsibility for the procreation of the species. Firstly, it is an honor that is earned by the parents who completely understand their responsibility to teach the laws of balance of God and creation. Secondly, procreation of the species is taken very seriously by your more spiritually advanced brothers on other planetary systems. The reason is that they recognize and honor the truth of the laws of God and the creation. You see, they have learned that the spiritually weak will pass on their disease, apathy, ignorance, and misunderstanding to their progeny, thus spreading the insidious cancer and destruction of the Antichrist throughout their species. They know that these children of God are their promise for the balanced continuation of their species. So it goes that the procreation responsibilities are monitored very carefully to maintain balance of the species within the laws of God and the creation. Every child is loved and carefully tended and instructed by all who have earned this, one of the most important responsibilities of any human, that one being a parent for God. Now, the other purpose for and meaning of this law is that you shall honor the mother and father principle of all that is in the creation. It's a very wondrous example is that you must honor this beloved planet Terra, who represents the mother principle in that she nurtures and sustains the lives of all creatures of God who exist here. And you must honor our Father God, who gives forth the seed of the Spirit of all life within the oneness of all that is. Of course, God is the mother-father principle in the harmony and balance and motion. And so there exists the mother-father unity and balance in all fragments of the divine creation. You shall not murder your fellow man. In the Bible of the so-called Christians, this law is written simply as thou shalt not kill, which leaves room for misunderstanding of interpretation. What his law means is you shall not wish death upon another human being of God in your thoughts, as well as you shall not commit physical murder of another human. Now, this rule does not mean you cannot defend yourself and your family if your lives are threatened, because that is suicide, which is self-murder, and so also against God's law. You must not ever choose suicide of your body because you feel worthless and can't go on, because then you dishonor the life force of God within you. Only God within you must decide the end of a physical life stream. And that time will only come when your purpose and mission is accomplished, so that the process and the divine plan of God for your spiritual growth will not be interrupted. The remorse of the soul is oftentimes much greater after the suicide of the body is accomplished than in the perceived altered ego illusion of suffering before the life stream is terminated. Just remember that when you honor God within yourself and all that is, and you truly understand the laws of balance given by your divine Holy One, you would never consider the self-punishment of suicide. You will simply cherish every living breath you take in the gift of life, of God, and the creation. Oh yes, and for those of you who label yourself feminists and pro-choice, which usually means pro-murder of one of God's children, remember this: there are no accidental pregnancies. If you become pregnant, which is being the vehicle for one of God's new creations, choosing an abortion because of your selfishness and irresponsible sexual behavior is still murder, any way you look at it. Remember, you each are given, along with your free will, personal responsibility for all your thoughts, all your words, all your deeds, all your actions. There are definitely many possible undesirable effects to illicit and wanton, lustful sexual activity. Pregnancy and disease are two obvious results which do and have occurred more often than not. Now, if a woman is forcefully and violently raped against her will and becomes pregnant, then she must commune with God within her as to whether or not He will terminate the pregnancy. So it will not be her altered ego choice or will, but the Father's will within her will be done. Now, this is usually what a miscarriage is, the Father's will. No one else will make the decision for her, only the Father within her. You must not commit adultery. The literal definition of adultery in your dictionary is the voluntary sexual intercourse of a married person with someone not the spouse. Now, the reason for this law, which still applies now, was that well before and at the time that the commandments were presented by Moses to the people, they were mostly simple-minded, ignorant, illiterate, and God-fearing because of their previous false teachings given by the religious empire leaders of that time. The problem was that throughout your past history, many young men and soldiers would lustfully spread their fertile seed in the sexual act to many various young, willing women whom they met within their daily lives and in their travels from village to village. Times have not changed much, have they? The obvious result was that many women become pregnant, and usually by that time the man was long gone to war or on to the next village. So she would be left alone with the responsibility of birthing and raising her child. Many women could not handle this unexpected responsibility and the desertion of who they usually thought to be their man. Many women, overcome by the horror, the shame, and the guilt of the circumstance, killed themselves and their unborn by trying to abort the child. Many women who were left on the streets unless they had friends or family who would take care of them, and many women abandoned their birth child, sometimes at the doorstep of a church or orphanage, but also some would leave the child to die in some dark and desolate place. So thus the necessity of this law: you must not commit adultery. Again, you'll find this in Law 15. You must obey the wisdom of God for the responsibility you have of balanced procreation of your species. So in His loving mercy and infinite wisdom, God created the commitment of marriage, or wedlock, defined in your dictionary as a legal contract by a man and woman to live together as husband and wife. Now, in the higher realms, it is a very serious and joyful commitment, and it is called divine union. In this way, He planted the seed of joint responsibility of this husband and wife to each other and to any offspring they produce. This is why marriage is to be considered one of the most serious and sacred commitments to God. Now, we will quote some of the actual teachings given on the subject of the Father's Word, given by the Master Teacher, Jesus, Isu, Emmanuel, from the book, now in print as part of the Phoenix Journal series, entitled, "And They Called His Name Emmanuel, I Am Sananda." Nearly 2,000 years ago, when the Master Jesus, Isu Emmanuel, was asked about the commitment of marriage and the rights of men and women, this is what he said: "All good things were given unto you, and you received the laws according to which you are to live. You should adhere to these and additional laws so that you shall prosper on earth and have peace in your families. Remove the power of the old law that women shall be subject to man, since she is a person equal to a man in spirit respect and has equal rights and obligations. There are many distortions in the laws since they were given forth by God and the celestial sons, for men have built them to be suitable unto themselves. When a man marries a woman, he shall pay in the most trusted steward the handling of her possessions as a price of security, lest she suffer from lack of her necessities. The price should be calculated in such a way that for each year of her life, 100 pieces of silver should be the basis measured according to her knowledge, her ability, and her strength, provided her health is not lacking. The price is not to be considered as that of a purchase, for no person may be sold or bought, but as security for the woman lest she suffer lack. Amount and type of financial security for modern times will be adjusted accordingly. For further clarification of Emmanuel's statements, read the Phoenix Journal Express, Volume 1 and 2, pages 34 and 40. So the bond of matrimony between man and woman should be permitted only if both are mental, competent, and capable of leading a marriage in accordance with the law. That is God's law. If according to predetermined agreement no price is paid, the law applies. The man must supply the needs of the wife regarding all of her necessities. The inability of a wife to bear children or a man's inability to sire children is no reason for divorce, nor does she or he deserve other opinions or actions. The only reason for divorce is that of adultery. That is a destruction of the endangering of spirit, the body, or the life of the member of one's own family unit. If a person is divorced by his own actions of adultery, he should be sterilized, for he is unworthy of life and its laws, for he has responded to the selfish, lustful drives of pleasure-seeking and has cast aside all responsible behavior. End of quote. Now, in the lateral translation, in order for adultery to occur, then one or the other or both of the two adulterers would have to have made the vow of marriage. In God's kingdom of truth, this vow of divine union made between a man and a woman to live together as one is taken most seriously indeed, because it is a commitment made to the Father within, each to the other, for that entire life stream. It is a contract with God rather than a legal contract of the human experience. So this means that a man and a woman who cohabitate together as lovers without a so-called legal contract must make the same commitment to God as those who have the so-called legal contract, whether they realize it or not. It is not necessarily always a contract made to God to procreate the species, because many who choose divine union may not choose or be able or be qualified to fulfill that procreation service to the one Father. Now, reread commandment number 6, where we discuss the responsibility of procreation. But both lovers still have the same responsibility as a legal married couple for the offspring they may produce. If they only choose cohabitation because of sexual lust or other selfish reasons, then they have thus denied their responsibility to God, and they will suffer the consequences of their actions at the hands of evil. Law 13, as you sow, so shall you reap, also known as the law of cause and effect. Does this mean that divorce, defined as dissolution of marriage bond by legal process or accepted custom, any radical or complete separation, goes against the laws of God and the creation? Well, yes and no. You see, it depends on the true circumstances experienced by the divorcing couple. For example, since your commitment in life is always first in service to God, then ideally your chosen partner in marriage must support your commitment as well as her commitment to the Holy Father. If, for example, your partner batters you and or your children physically or emotionally, and thus does not support or honor either his or your commitment in service to God, then you are no longer bound by your contract, your bond of marriage. And why would God bind you and your children to a commitment of suffering and punishment? It is not logical. But if your partner decides that he or she wants to divorce because you are just no longer attractive to him, her, physically and sexually, this is not an acceptable reason for divorce. Let's take that example further. Say your partner is no longer attracted to you and decides to find sexual satisfaction elsewhere. He or she has committed adultery. Reread above the quote by Jesus Emmanuel. If you choose to do so, it is an acceptable reason for divorce. The reason is that not only has your partner broken his or her commitment with you and himself, but in the act of adultery, he has broken his commitment to serve God. Because by the act of fulfilling his lust, he has invited the Antichrist within his temple. Of course, the choice you make about whether or not to divorce an adulterous mate will ultimately be made by the Father within you. You must not steal materially or emotionally. Now, this law does mean literally that you must not steal, defined as to take another's property, dishonestly, especially in a secret manner, to take slyly as a look, to gain insidiously or artfully as he stole her heart. And this law also means you must not steal the trust and the good faith of another by lying to them about your true motives and intent. You see, malicious lying and stealing are opposite sides of the same coin. Now, here are some examples of various forms of lying and stealing. If a man falsely tells a woman who is a virgin that he loves her and wants to marry her, but all he really wants from her is a sexual encounter, he is misleading her. If she in good faith falls in love with him and also falls for the trap of his false promise to her and succumbs to his pressure to express their love physically before the marriage vow is made, and then he abandons her, he has essentially stolen her heart, her innocence, and her chastity for his own lustful, selfish intent. Now, if the woman wisely refuses his sexual advances and finds herself rejected by him, he's still guilty of lying to her, which is stealing from her emotionally. Now, the big difference in these two scenarios is that although she has been robbed emotionally, at least she doesn't have the guilt of dishonoring herself by breaking the laws of God and giving away her chastity to an unworthy man. Here's another example of stealing the innocence of another. Innocence defined as free from sin, evil, not guilty of a specific crime, harmless, knowing no evil, without guile or cunning, an innocent person as a child. Now, stealing in itself is a sin against God's laws upon only the one who steals. But when one succeeds in stealing the innocence of another, what he has essentially done is willfully and blatantly lied to them. So thus he has enticed and manipulated the other to also break the laws of God and the creation. So in order for innocence to be stolen from another, the person stealing must be doing so knowingly and blatantly, with the intent of manipulating another to fulfill his own selfish means, and the victim has to guilelessly trust the person. For example, the leader of a country sends the young men off to war, which also involves murder, in a faraway place, and he tells them, "You are fighting for freedom and defending your country." And then they believe this lie. So they go to war and they realize in horror that they are slaughtering innocent people and protecting and defending wealthy sheiks and their oil fields and money, not defending their country's freedom. That is when their innocence has been stolen from them, when they realize that they have been lied to and used by one or ones they trusted to perpetrate evil. Another example, say you are a child and you discover that your father has a girlfriend on the side. That is adultery, friends. When you face him with this, he tells you that you must promise him you will not tell your mother. He still loves her and doesn't want to hurt her in the family. If you tell her, she will divorce him and And, well, as a child, you're devastated in your heart because your father has asked you to lie, but you promised him. And so somehow it would be your fault if you told your mother, and you certainly don't want to cause your parents to divorce. This is emotional blackmail. And the father has stolen the innocence of his own child by making her promise to lie and make her feel responsible for his irresponsible behavior. For what could happen if she told her mother the truth? Another perhaps more repugnant example. Any adult man or woman who willfully indulges in the lustful coercion and manipulation of a child who trusts him or her to perform any form of sexual activities has most definitely stolen the innocence of that poor child. Here's another example close to the hearts of Americans. Your forefathers of the wondrous United States of America were inspired by God in the development of the most sacred Constitution and Bill of Rights in order to maintain peace and balance and allow you freedom and the pursuit of happiness. Although not perfect, with the addition of certain amendments abolishing slavery, for example, it became the most important and protective set of standards for human rights, decency, and freedom in your current history on earth. Now, every person you elect into the offices of leadership, such as the presidency, the vice presidency, Congress, and Senate, has taken an oath to uphold the Constitution of the United States of America. You, the people, have elected these leaders on trust and good faith that they will honor your Constitution and Bill of Rights. You now have a president and a Congress who mostly support him, who has essentially nullified this U.S. Constitution by his executive orders in order to pursue the one world order, which has a new so-called constitution. For one world domination, this is called stealing your freedom, America, and making you slaves. And are those so-called elected leaders who support this infringement on your U.S. Constitution honoring the oath they gave you and to God? They're stealing your freedom. And worse than that, they are taking an oath that they know they won't honor. That is called lying to you people for their own selfish means. And please, do not confuse the ones who act by willful guile and deceit in stealing the innocence or possessions of others with the ones who truly believe a lie to be truth and then pass on their false belief to others, for example, their children or students. This is simple ignorance of truth, and although it may or may not be acceptable to God, ignorance is not a willful act of stealing the innocence of another. Here is something else that is very important to remember and understand clearly. If one tells what he knows to be a lie in true self-defense, or the defense, privacy, and protection of another, this is not against God's law. This does not mean lying to malicious deceive about evil secret oaths or activities such as in the evil cult of Freemasonry. This is one way the Antichrist twists God's law to condemn others, by one's telling you must never lie, which means to make a statement which one knows to be false, that which is intended to produce a false impression. You can literally be made the tool for the harm or destruction of yourself or another. Now let's give you some examples to think about. Let's say it is World War II, and in compassion you're hiding a Japanese-American family in your basement to protect them from being put in the camps. So the police come to your door and ask if you have seen any Japanese people. Are you going to tell them the truth, knowing it will endanger your family as well as the ones you are protecting? Next example. Let's say you go to war and are captured by the enemy. They require you to appear on television and make a statement to your leaders which you know is false. But if you do not, they will kill you. Are you going to do what they ask? Here's an example given several times by ATON. Let's say our beloved Jesus Christ Sananda comes to your home and the authorities come looking for him, and you know it is because his prosecutors do not want him free and alive. Are you going to tell them where he is? And we will give one more example which may become reality for many. Let's say your government institutes a draft requirement. Well, your son, father, or friend refuses to sign up for the draft and decides to become a conscientious objector. Now, if the authorities call you and ask you where this person is, will you tell them? Now, when it gets a little sticky with God is when, for example, you witness a murder. You know the murderer, and because of your fear of being a witness and perhaps threatened yourself, you lie to the police and tell them you saw nothing. Think carefully about this, because there are crimes committed daily against God's law of balance, of which there are witnesses who are too afraid to tell the police. The criminal remains free to continue his crimes against God. Remember, you must understand the difference. We are not talking about witnessing the breaking of man-made laws, which may or not be just and change continually with the times. We are talking about the breaking of God's law, which do not change and are eternally the laws of balance within the creation. You ones also have something called little white lie, defined as a false statement made with the intent of being polite or kind. This is also called the social lie. Now, most of you ones do choose to politely lie to retain your privacy. This is one way, but there are ways to not lie and retain your privacy as well. For example, if someone asks you how much money you make or what you do with your time, you have several ways to respond. You can lie, or the considered direct but harsh response is, that is none of your business. But for those of you who wish to honor yourself and be polite to the other, you can simply say, please do not be offended, but I prefer not to answer that question as it does not concern you. Now, there are situations which do fit the criterion of the white or polite lie, although many of you ones do try to stretch the limits of these criterion. The key here is intent. Now, oftentimes, rather than honoring your true feelings, you will hide behind the white lie in order to keep your job. For instance, if you perceive your employer to be narrow-minded and tyrannical, and you are afraid that by being honest and direct with your ideas and feelings, you'll be fired. You see, you perpetuate the perceived tyranny against yourself by being polite and allowing it to continue. An example of a truly polite lie is this. When you know your mother spent hours preparing a meal for you and you did not like ham, and she asks you how you like your meal, and you say, it is excellent. Although it is not exactly a true statement, your true intent in kindness and appreciation is to honor what you know to be her feelings of love for you. So if you lie and your intent is to manipulate someone in order to selfishly achieve or receive something from them you desire, rather than acting with integrity and being direct, this is not a white lie. Remember this, you can lie to yourself or to another, but you cannot ever lie to God. You see, God always monitors and records your true intent in all situations He presents to you. You must not covet or envy that which belongs to your neighbor. Let us first define the words covet and envy. Covet means to long for something belonging to another. Covetousness means excessively desirous of something, greedy. Envy means a feeling of resentment or discontent over another's superior attainments, endowments, or possessions. So the literal meaning of this law is that you must not, because of your own insecure, inferior feelings and lack of self-worth, long to have something another has, such as money, a new car, a skill, or a talent. And then on top of longing for this object another has, you must not then resent the person who has attained that which you feel you desire, but have not created, exactly because of your insecure, inferior feelings and your lack of self-worth. What transpires when you become covetous and envious is that you become wrapped up in your greed and resentment. and you will not be taking personal responsibility for your manifested illusion. You will continue to create the perceived lack, and eventually you will be consumed by the effects of covetousness and envious feelings, which most often result in the various manifestations of self-punishment, anger, guilt, criticism, jealousy, and depression. You must not impose nor enforce your free will upon the free will of another, also known as the law of non-interference. Now, this law was given forth by God so that the free will and the soul evolution of each fragment would not be infringed upon without permission from God within, especially by the adversaries of God with more awareness of their power. Now, this is each fragment's God-given protection, so that there is justness in their individual process of God potential enfoldment toward the one. Also, it prevents even your benevolent brothers from interfering or assisting without permission from the Holy Father. You see, during each life stream of each fragment, there is present the opportunity and the potential for divine choice through the free will experiences of each fragment. The young souls begin to unfold their godness through the lessons they learn in each life stream experience. In other words, they learn by experience to know God within them and what thoughts, words, and deeds keep them in the darkness and ignorance of what their true God potential is. Now, you may be asking yourself, well, what about the tremendous evil influence upon this planet? Why is it allowed by God? The reason is this. Even the Satans, or adversaries of God, were not only created creatures of God, but were also given free will. God has simply given his adversary creations their opportunity to grow in their potential of godness and divine holy light. But because of their limitedness in behavior, meaning ego, selfish separation from the one, their reality or playground of experience was also limited by God. They are bound by their own choice to the lowest levels described as the first and fifth physical manifested experiences. You see, the fallen ones have self-imposed limitations by their choice to be adversarial and separate from their Creator. But they're always given opportunities to see the light of truth in the oneness of all. The rules are strict, and the fallen ones know the rules to remain ego separate from God, but remain in their game of manipulation and deception. For example, if you feel the whisperings of the Antichrist within you, you can demand in the name of the Holy Father, God, and or Jesus Christ Sananda that all dark fragments and energies leave your space immediately. They must go, but they can hang around the periphery of your energy field and wait for a weak spot in your protective shield. This is why it's important of asking God for his white light shield of love, protection, guidance, power, wisdom, integrity, and courage. So you must ask the Father within you to please show you that which you need in order to serve his will. Hence the importance of not my will, Father, but in all things let thy will be done. Now this sincere invocation is what keeps you on your path of service to God and the creation, and out of the folly of ignorance and perceived separation where exists the dark brotherhood or the Antichrist. You may begin to see that many of you ones here have now experienced many, many thousands or even millions of life streams on these lower levels by your choice to be or remain ignorant to your own God potential and connection to the one, all that is. Here is a wondrous description of this process of discovery by our beloved brother Germain. All dimensions of the creation exist simultaneously. You simply have only your conscious awareness in this, the third dimension. And as you work and live in this dimensional experience, you, with the help of your spiritual teachers, are stretching your awareness to fourth, fifth, and sometimes even higher dimensional levels. It is not a vertical stretch as you perceive things linearly. It is an expansive, all-encompassing stretch of awareness. Your awareness expands to the level of your understanding. And when you have learned or some particular lessons, when you have owned the lesson, it frees your awareness just a bit more, stretching, moving, growing within the mind of the universal I am, the one, all that is. Now, the reason that your benevolent brothers, the hosts of heaven, have been sent to assist you is that many of you have prayed to God for freedom from the bondage of your self-imposed ignorance. They're sent here in answer to your asking God for his divine guidance and assistance. They are your brothers of higher awareness and service to the light of God and the creation. You see, some of you have recognized the folly of the Antichrist within you and the influence that mass consciousness has allowed the Satans or adversaries to have over you and this beloved planet Earth. You're tired and frankly bored with this illusion, with being the adversary of Godness. You want your freedom. You want to claim or reclaim his holy lighted presence within you. It is time for graduation, friends, to higher levels of life. And you will each now find or awaken to your divinity of oneness, or of this very important to understand. You will remain bound to these lower levels for perhaps another millennia, before another opportunity is granted by the expanding awareness of the God Self within by the One. Remember, though, that the lighted hosts of God may assist you and give instructions and truth through the maze of lies and deception, but they cannot do it for you. You each must reclaim your own power of the Divine One within you. None can do it for you. None can do it for another. So it is wise to pay close attention to your instruction for conscious immortality. You will either serve God or you will serve your altered ego self. It is up to you. You must not judge others, but you must wisely judge all behavior and actions which are contrary to the laws of balance of God in the creation. And Emmanuel wisely told the people, "Judge not falsely, lest ye be judged falsely. For with whatever judgment you judge, so will you be judged. And with whatever measure you measure, so will you be measured. Therefore judge according to the logic of the laws of nature, which are from the creation, for they alone are true and accurate." And what do you see but the splinter in your brother's eye? And are you not aware of the sliver in thine own eye? You hypocrite! First, pull the sliver out from your own eye, and then see how you can pull the splinter out of your brother's eye. First, learn the laws of nature and of the creation, their logic, before you judge and want to see mistakes of your fellow man. First, learn through the laws of nature and of the creation your own mistakes, so that you can correct the mistakes of your fellow man. You should never give sacred things unto the dogs, nor throw your pearls before the swine, lest they step on them with their feet and turn on you and tear you apart. For verily I say unto you, do not throw your spiritual treasures into the dirt, and do not waste them on those who are unworthy, for they do not thank you, and they will tear you apart. For their understanding is small, and their spirit is weak. End quote. And they called his name Emmanuel. Exactly as it is written, no one must ever judge another to be lesser or more than he, especially because the other one is of a different color or race, creed, or sex, or planet than be you. But understand this carefully. You must wisely judge the behaviors and actions by any one, including self, which you know are against life, meaning against or contrary to the laws which maintain the balance created by God within the creation. And so you must honor all your brothers and sisters as equal fragments of the one. But you must not accept, tolerate, or allow behavior and actions to continue in your space, which you know break the laws of balance. But you must not think harshly of another and call him stupid or not worthy because he's different in personality and behavior than you are and understand. Each is equal in reflection of God, only different. Celebrate and honor the unique differences of others. They, as are you, are expressing the Father within them in a unique and glorious way. And remember, God allows ignorance of the law only to a point, and then he is pushed out of the temple of any of his fragments who continue with their blatant disregard and honor for life. As ye sow, so shall ye reap, also called the law of cause. Now this is a law that most choose to ignore or misunderstand when they do not want to take personal responsibility for their manifested experience, perceived good and or especially bad. God created cause and effect so that each soul fragment should recognize that when he did a specific act, say stole a car from his brother, that there would be an effect to his transgression, such as perhaps going to jail. But the nature of the effect is produced in a way unique to each individual fragment, which will bring the greatest opportunity for the understanding of the lesson for that soul fragment. Unfortunately, for many, the repeat of same errors has continued over the course of some thousands of years. Yes, it is by choice that the soul would refuse to take personal responsibility for his thoughts, his words, and his deeds. The catch is all are responsible for all which occurs within their manifested illusion, whether or not one wisely chooses to finally recognize and accept this truth is entirely up to each. They will still suffer the consequences of their actions which are contrary to God's laws, and or they will also reap the divine benefits of understanding and obeying God's laws. Now in your Eastern religions, Hinduism and Buddhism, they have a term called karma, defined in Funk and Wagnall's dictionary as the spiritual force generated by one's action which determines one's reincarnated situation. Loosely, fate, vibration, karma, even by this definition, does not accurately describe the same purpose or meaning of simple cause and effect. The term karma, loosely believed by many, implies you must do this or that, or this or that has occurred because it is your karma, implying that it is also your fate. But one can fall in the rut of blaming all experiences on their karma and therefore not adequately learning the lesson to release this perceived karma. The definition of karma implies that yes, there are consequences to your actions, but that you are doomed to pay back lifetime after lifetime, and does not take into consideration the release of payback when the lesson is truly learned by the soul fragment. So remember this, at any instant when the true understanding and recognition has occurred regarding the error and effects of one's actions, that one can, through self-forgiveness, release any repetition of a transgression against another, self, or God. For example, let's say that the one known as Hitler, who was responsible for the death of millions, truly recognized and understood his transgressions against God in the moments before he made his death transition. So all things are possible, friends. And in those moments before his death from his life stream, he prayed to God within him for forgiveness of self and all others, and that he then put his will into God's will to be of service only unto the Father. Now, for ones who believe in karma, they would say that the soul energy that was Hitler would be doomed to the same persecution he committed on others, as well as at least 1 million deaths at the hands of a tyrant such as was he. And if Hitler refused to see his folly, then undoubtedly his self-judgment before God would be severe. But Depending on the level of his understanding or the learning of the lessons, his payback could be that he becomes one who devotes his entire next reincarnation life streams to the service of God by helping his fellow brethren overcome their spiritual starvation. Well, do you think then that this is possible, that God would not allow his servant back within his fold of truth, love, and light? One must never forget that even the victims of Hitler's hatred chose their victimhood. If one choose not to become victims to anyone or any situations, by always honoring God within self and all others, and thus living in balance with the laws of God and the creation, they would no longer create victimizers such as Hitler. It is really so simple. If they learn their lessons of how and why they created their victimhood, then they would also forgive themselves and all who they perceived victimized them, so that they too could release and be free of the bondage of karma. And on top of forgiveness, their release may resolve actually being over thankful to the Father within for bringing the lesson to them and thus helping them recognize their self-transgressions and becoming now free from the bondage of victimhood. Do you see the picture now? The responsibility for all manifested experience lies with all who share in and exist within the experience. You must honor all commitments made in service to God, the Father, the one within. Now let us describe what commitments are made in service to God versus commitments of this manifested illusion. Your most important commitment in the service to God is to wisely understand and obey the laws of God and the creation which we are unfolding for you here. Now this is the excellent way for honoring self and God within all others in service to God and the creation. Simply understand and obey the laws of God and the creation. You once have made this commitment difficult unto yourselves, and it needn't any longer be so. You now have the laws before you, and you need not any longer claim ignorance or misunderstanding. Do you see? Claim your divine holy godness now. We are all one. The time is now before you to know and own the truth. Now, let us discuss the other types of commitments made by first defining what commitment means in Funk and Wagnall's dictionary. The act of committing to devote oneself unreservedly, or the state of being committed, an engagement or pledge to do something. Other commitments which are made in service to God include marriage, parenthood, feeding and tending the physically hungry, poor, and ill, and spreading the word of truth about the Spirit of God and the creation to all of your spiritual, ignorant, and starved brethren who will listen. Now, a commitment you make to buy a house or a car on credit to be paid by future income is shaky at best for both parties agreeing to these terms. Credit in this circumstance is a promise to pay later at some designated future time. And many families are now finding, and many more will find, that they cannot honor this promise to pay because many have lost or will lose their jobs and thus do not have the income to pay. This is an example of a commitment which is not in service to God. Credit, and so too has trillions been lost by the many who have become trapped in obligations they cannot pay for. There are thousands of examples of commitments made of this type. So, if you make a promise or a commitment to a fellow brother or sister to help them in some way, such as pay them for a service performed for you or to feed their pets and take care of their homes while they're away, then your word represents your integrity to honor to the best of your ability. And all promises made to the other. All personal power is in the direct relationship to the integrity of your soul. This means that if your word of promise or commitment means nothing, then you dishonor yourself, your brethren in God, and you become powerless and thus a tool for evil. So the moral of this story is, think carefully about any promises or commitments you make before you give your word. Do not give your word for some future promise unless you are certain you will be able to keep your word. And be certain you completely understand what any promise, oath, or commitment that is asked of you on this plane. It means before you give your word to it. Because if you are not careful, as in the case of many so-called secret organizations, societies, and mystery schools, your commitment to them may mean your inadvertent commitment to evil. A commitment made to evil or Satan is not a commitment made in service to God, and therefore it is not recognized by God. You must obey the wisdom of God for the responsible and balanced procreation of your species. Now, we have written about the commitment of marriage by a man and a woman to God as being one of the necessary components to also becoming a parent for God, which means procreating your species. We find that in Law 8, you must not commit adultery. Now, the divine and the sacred act which was created by God for the procreation of the species, you once call sexual union. God created this divine union to be performed between one man and one woman, specifically maintaining the balanced level of the species for each given planetary system. Now, the fallen ones, or the adversaries of godness, have completely perverted and maligned this one sacred and divine act that at one time was done with complete love and devotion to the Father within each partner, so that sex, is now called a birthright to be done often, with impunity, and with many partners of either sex, and without the consideration of love or responsible procreation. How we and the Father weep for you. This one abuse of God's creation has nearly destroyed your species. Let us quote once again and from, "And they called his name Emmanuel. I am Sananda." The act of marriage and procreation must have the highest degree of pure intent and preparation. For upon these bonds and restrictions will rest the preservation of mankind as a species upon the planet. If everything is done and adhered to in justice and peace will come to all mankind, and life in the human form can be preserved. And if a man continues his selfish and imprudent behavior, he will sound his own death tariff. There reaches a point beyond which a planet cannot support the imbalanced system perpetuated by mankind. And yet, so it shall come to pass that man will not listen and bring destruction upon his own species. And it will come about in some 2 millennium that man will have reached the point of self-destruction. This is 1991, friends. Have you fulfilled this prophecy of Jesus the Christ Emmanuel and other prophets before him? And so it is projected by the prophets, and shall it come to pass, and it is time of fulfillment, and in my time of fulfillment. End of quote. So let's begin with God's directive about marriage and procreation between a man and a woman. Now, it's very clear that this does not say marriage and the sexual act is okay between a man and a woman, or a woman and a woman, or 2 men and one woman, or 3 women and 1 man. Again, the laws of balance are logical, meaning they were created specifically to maintain balance within the creation. So because of the various degrees of deliberate, systematic, and malevolent, lewd, and lascivious sexual behaviors, which are the corruption of this divine union, and which have been in our practice by most on your plane, the warning given above by our beloved Jesus Emmanuel is transpiring before your very eyes in this time frame. The sexual act was specifically designed to be performed by 1 man and 1 woman who had committed their divine love as one in the union of marriage ordained by God. And through this union of love, The act of sexual intercourse between a husband and his wife for procreation was a most sacred and honored responsibility, an extension of their love and commitment to God in His service as parents of His children. Now, remember the law of cause and effect. The effects of breaking this one directive of God are all about you today. Overpopulation and the spread of fatal venereal and blood-borne diseases, such as syphilis and AIDS, are proven to be your self-punishment to the point of creating the nearly complete destruction of your human species on earth. So let there be no misunderstanding. The following behaviors are specifically and undeniably against or contrary to the laws of God and the creation. Number 1, any homosexual sexual activity between 2 or more men is strictly forbidden. 2, any homosexual sexual activity between 2 or more women is strictly forbidden. 3, any bisexual sexual activity between 2 or more men and women is strictly forbidden. Keep in mind, we are specifically referring to sexual activities, not love, intimacy, the sharing of soul deep closeness and specialnesses of the friendship. Cohabitation, sharing living quarters, homes together, and friendship between members of the same sex, meaning that it is the lewd, lustful, and irresponsible sexual act that is specifically and strictly against God and life. 4, any anal, sodomy, sexual intercourse performed between any persons, male or female, is strictly forbidden. 5, any sexual activities performed with animals, bestiality, by any human, is strictly forbidden. 6, any sexual activity performed by ones closely related within the same family line, incest, for example, brother and sister, father and daughter, uncle and niece, aunt and nephew, cousin and cousin, mother and son, grandfather and granddaughter, is strictly forbidden. Any sexual activity performed by any male or female adult upon or with any child is strictly forbidden. 8, prostitution, the act of offering oneself, man or woman, to another for sexual relations in exchange for payment of same, is strictly forbidden. Number 9, any sadistic or masochistic sexual practices performed by anyone or ones upon self or others is strictly forbidden. Sadistic, a tendency to take delight in being cruel. Masochistic is a condition in which sexual gratification depends largely on undergoing physical pain or humiliation, a tendency to derive pleasure from one's own suffering. Any voyeuristic, one who is sexually gratified by looking at sexual objects or acts, activity, or any participation in pornographic, sexual, explicit, and obscene materials, movies, magazines, books, artwork, and objects is strictly forbidden. Now please understand that this is the preoccupation with behavior of lustful and lascivious physical pleasure that you must each choose to avoid and rise above spiritually. The corruption and preoccupation with sexual thoughts, words, and action has become hypnotizingly obsessive and also terribly degrading to the spirit of life of the one. This is not love by any definition. Can you not see this truth before you and within you? Your sexual obsession must stop if you are to reach beyond your mortal body and into the kingdom of God. Now, many of you by now are probably wondering about the act of masturbation, stimulation of sexual organs by oneself. First, reread the above paragraph. Masturbation is a self-pleasure sexual act upon self, and it is also what most of you couples are doing when you have sex together and call it making love. The only difference is that it is the sharing of mutual masturbation with your partner. Mutual masturbation is not divine sexual union for celebrating procreation. When one is an adult and does not wish to have children, the seeking of sexual pleasure by self or with another is a transgression upon self simply because you are denying and limiting your spiritual creative potential within. So the sexual desire in this time on your place of extreme sexual preoccupation begins for many youngsters at puberty. Many will have sexual release or dreams while they sleep. And with the careful and loving guidance of the parents well before and during this time, the child will not be frightened at the changes in his or her body and will most likely occasionally indulge in masturbation for either curious exploration or will most likely occasionally indulge in masturbation for either curious exploration or release of the physical body. Moderate or occasional masturbation done in privacy by any either child or adult is not harmful to or against life until it becomes an obsession, a preoccupation. Also, masturbation can be a means of self-punishment, and this is most harmful to the Spirit of God within. Remember this, parents. It can also become very harmful to a child if through his training he is taught to fear or despise his genitalia or be made to feel guilty for self-sexual exploration or masturbation. He must learn about his personal responsibility and must understand all the laws of God, including those governing procreation. But if you make the child feel fearful, shameful, or guilty about his own personal sexual exploration, you may actually be creating for him obsessive preoccupation with sexuality. If the child is not exposed to constant sexual stimulating media, he will quickly lose interest after the initial self-exploration. If his creative potential is encouraged, nurtured, and supported by his parents and teachers, the more spiritually aware children and adults will either not have much interest in or gradually lose interest in sexual exploration of any kind. It is much healthier for the spirit of this process of becoming detached from sexual feelings is natural and by choice because of true spiritual understanding and awareness. Now, what you once have labeled sexual energy or libido is actually a corruption of the creative and nurturing potential of the Spirit of God within you. Let us repeat this. Your sexual energy, libido, is actually a corruption of the creative and nurturing potential of the Spirit of God within you. Now let us see how your Funk and Wagnall's dictionary defines libido. Sexual desire or impulse, the instinctual craving or drive behind all human activities. Now, did you read that clearly, friends? Instinctual craving or drive behind all human activities. That catch is, precious one. Sex is not the instinctual craving or drive that was created by God. This was your creative, nurturing drive to know and celebrate God within you, to co-create the ever-unfolding expansion and adventure of life. The truly loving divine union, that of male and female, experiencing their creative potential through the sexual act for procreation, was created to be a union of divine loving devotion and celebration of the gifts of oneness shared and of the new life created from God. Rarely do ones feel true love, caring friendship, affection, and intimacy toward their mates on your plane. Most have simply forgotten what love is. You think perhaps you and your mate are one of the rare exceptions? There is a test for you. How long would your marriage and commitment last if today you completely stopped all sexual activity with one another? Now think about this carefully. Do you truly give of yourself to your mate sexually and otherwise because you wish to please them? To please both of you? To please yourself? You once think your sexual organ is ecstasy, You even limit ecstasy. You see, you are not your desires. You are not your emotions. You are the spirit of life of God. And your spirit is the master over your desires and emotions. Don't you see that you have simply chosen, in your illusion of ignorance and confusion, to make your emotions and desires the master over your spirit, your godness? This corruption of your creative potential was created, conditioned, and molded by the Antichrist. You simply bought the lie as truth and have become addicted to your desire for sex. You don't believe your sexual desire is created. Look around you today. Your advertising media, as well as your magazines, television, and movies, are creating your desires for you by conditioning and molding you through false images of what is beauty, what is sex appeal. In other words, by directing your attention constantly to how you look physically, your athletic proness, and your sex appeal and attractiveness. And why has this desire creating worked? Because the Antichrist first molds of false images and then plays upon your fear of being too unattractive, unworthy, unpopular, and simply rejected by others who you allow to judge you as a human being. The Antichrist keeps you bound by the false promises created by your desire to be worthy of life. So you are too busy trying to fit the false mold and therefore do not develop your creative spiritual potential within. How dare you feel unworthy because of believing the nonsense of false images? Please remember this truth. You are God's temple. Now, advertisers are always selling their image of what you once called romance, and you are encouraged to think it means passionate sexual fulfillment. Now, your dictionary describes romance as a love affair, a kind of love between the sexes characterized by high ideals of devotion and strong ardor. Adventurous, heroic, or exotic nature, romance of faraway places. When you crave romance, whether you know it or not, it does not mean sexual affair, dear ones. It means love affair. You are craving to experience within you God's love of life. You crave to feel alive, warm and intense feelings, eagerness and zeal. Why? Because you are bored and spiritually unfulfilled with the self-created limits of your life. Limits which the controlled media has to set you up for in the first place. So you're out of balance and you're seeking to ignite your creative potential within romance. Is the promise of adventure and joy for experiencing the spirit of life of God within you. You see, romance is not sexual adventure or a place to go. It is your desire to feel and knowing God within you. And you can experience romance through the sharing of devoted and adventurous love of life with your mate. Regardless of what your media hype tells you, remember this. Your desire for romance is your desire for change from a limited and spiritually unfulfilling existence to recognizing and experiencing your unlimited creative spiritual potential within. So the next time you have a sexual urge, look around you. What have you been watching, reading, or participating in which created this desire? Men, when you see a physically beautiful woman, is your first thought admiration and appreciation of this gift of loveliness? And do you wonder about the loveliness and beauty of her spirit? Or instead, do you first wonder about the pleasure you would receive if you could have sexual union with her? And the same holds true for you women who call yourselves liberated, which usually first means sexually liberated and same equal rights as men to have many casual sexual encounters. Now recognize that this sexual urge is really your unfulfilled creative potential, screaming to be released from the self-imposed limit or boundary of the physical sexual act. Act, to play the part, impersonate, to serve temporarily or as a substitute, to pretend, The sexual act is limiting, substituting, and impersonating your creative and spiritual unfoldment to know God. When you truly understand and recognize this truth, your creative spiritual unfoldment can no longer be frustrated and limited to the repetition of a silly and truly spiritual, unfulfilling sexual act. Does this mean you are expected by self and God to stop all sexual activity now? Only if it is your choice, made with the joy of truly understanding and thus having the freedom of detachment from this addiction and no desire to procreate. So for most of you, especially adults, sexual behavior has now become addictive. So you must treat it as such. Remove as much of the temptation from your presence as possible. Just as the alcoholic must remove himself from bars and must remove the alcohol from his home. Be gentle with self. Carefully abide by the list of 10 items above which you are strictly forbidden. Sexual behaviors, including adultery. And if you're single or married and have addiction to the sexual act, use occasional masturbation as the lesser of the evils if you must. Now, if you are happily married and both have enjoyed your addition to the monogamous mutual masturbation of your sexual act, then both partners will need to become detached for the addiction to be gone. So, be gentle with self and your mate. Must be aware and responsible to consequences such as pregnancy, and persist in your goal to self, to release and detach from all things of physical manifestation. Simply recognize without punishing self with guilt and shame that this is a transgression against the creative spirit of life within you. For a time, accept that you will have desire because you are addicted, and many of you understand it as an extension of your love. Do not punish self or others. Let the desire dissolve naturally within each partner. As you begin the unfoldment and adventure of discovering your creative spiritual potential, you will be surprised because at some point you will find that the sexual act is no longer appealing to either of you. You will be detached and no longer have interest in it. 16. You must do unto others as you would have them do unto you, also called the golden rule. The golden rule. Now, how true it is that if ones would really think about how they treat one another and consider that they are all one, that most of your petty perceived differences would dissolve. Ask yourself how you, when you honor the Spirit of God within, truly like to be treated by others. So here's a start for you. With respect, with reverence, with honor, with worthiness, with enthusiasm, with patience, with tolerance and understanding, with forgiveness, with kindness and courtesy, with caring, with appreciation, with generosity, and with interest in your conversation, with love, with consideration, with honesty and integrity, and with trust, with friendship, and with harmony. Now, do you treat others in the same way described above? How would you like to be treated? Do you even treat yourself in the same ways described above? If you do not even honor yourself, how do you expect to receive honor and respect from others? Treat others honorably and with integrity, kindness and tolerance, and expect that they will treat you the same. And if they do not treat you with the same respect, honor yourself enough to recognize their transgression and call it to their attention, and then leave their presence. And Jesus Emmanuel told the people, ask and it shall be given unto you. Seek and you shall find. Knock and it shall be opened unto you. For he who asks of his Spirit receives, and he who seeks through the power of Spirit finds. And he who knocks at the door of his Spirit, to him it will be opened. So who is there among you who, if his son asked him for bread, would give him a stone? Or if he asked you for a fish, would you offer him a serpent? Therefore, If you, even though you are being wicked, can still give your children good gifts, how much more will your Spirit give unto you if you request it? End of quote. The Spirit of God within you always gives you what you need if you put aside your alter ego and humbly commune with your spirit. All the power of the Father exists within you to give unto you that which your spirit needs to lovingly sustain life and give joy, fulfillment, and inner peace. You only need but ask the Father within to show you, or to tell you, or to give you that which you need to sustain His service, that of light, of love, of joy. In all things, thy will be done. His will be done. There is a saying, be careful what you ask for. You just might get it. Now this saying gives recognition to your power of manifestation and how when you selfishly view life from the fog of the altered ego, you may not truly understand what your spirit within needs. You may be unpleasantly surprised at what the altered ego conjures up for you as consequences of denying the will of the Father within you. 17. The evil adversaries of God must always wear a sign of their evilness. By the fruits ye shall know them. One of the biggest signs of the evil ones is their hypocrisy. The pretending of having feelings or characteristics which one does not possess, especially deceitful presumption of virtue. One who pretends to be pious and virtuous without really being so. Emmanuel spoke to the people and they called his name Emmanuel, I am Sananda, and said, woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites, who you keep cups and bowls outwardly clean, yet inside they are full of rapaciousness and greed. First you must purify that which is inside the cup, so that what is on the outside also becomes and remains pure. So you too appear godly and good in front of people. But inwardly you're full of hypocrisy and falsehood and violations. Woe unto you hypocrites who build tombs for the prophets and adorn the graves of the just and speak. If we had been at that time of our fathers, we would not have become guilty with them in the shedding of the prophets' blood. Therefore you fulfill the measure of your fathers, since you end your life without understanding, and you will have trouble learning in the future. You, generation of vipers, how can you be great in spirit without having any understanding? All the just blood which was shed through you on earth will come back to you, beginning with the first prophet, whom your fathers and forefathers murdered, to the blood of Zacharias, the son of Barachas, whom you have killed between the temple and the altar, and therefore all the blood of the future, which will be shed, will be of your own accountability. Verily, verily, I say to you, all this shall come upon you, upon your race, for a very long time yet to come and pass. End quote. So will you find that hypocrisy does not belong to the kingdom of God? The ones who declare their spiritual wealth, piety, and righteousness, who declare themselves chosen simply because they belong to this or that religion or race, are fools. And they're hypocrites, because what they outwardly say that they are and believe in, and what they actually secretly think and do, are most quite often different. And Jesus the Christ Emmanuel gives us more signs to help us recognize the evil ones. Beware of false prophets and scribes, who come into you in sheep's clothing, but inside they are like raving wolves, and preach to you humility and shrines, false deities and gods, and preach to you of humility to idols and false teachings. And beware of those who forbid you access to wisdom and knowledge, and tell you not to go forth to hear what perhaps is truth, for they speak to you only to attain power over you, and to seize your goods and belongings. Always search beneath the coverings to inspect that which they do not tell you, and further, check carefully those things that they extract from you. Truth and wisdom in truth are given with no price of treasure nor power of force. You shall recognize these ones by the fruit they bear. Can a person gather grapes from the thorns and figs from the thistles? Therefore, every good tree brings forth good fruit, but a bad tree brings forth wicked fruit. A good tree cannot bring forth wicked fruit, and a bad tree cannot bring forth good fruit. Therefore, by their fruit shall you know them. End of quote. Ye ones who faithfully have believed your holy Bible to be written in purity from God will by now most undoubtedly be at the very least curious about how and why this sabotage of the truth has been allowed to occur. So, we will tell you. It occurred that even at the time when the one known as Moses lived, that the religious empire leaders became most jubilant when presented by Moses with the commandments given by God. The reason, because they became the self-appointed creators and enforcers of their interpretations of God's law. You see, they discovered that by the careful manipulation and the interpretation of these laws, such as removing any references to reincarnation from the scriptures, then they could maintain a much more effective level of control and discipline over the people they ruled. In other words, they would stand between God and the Father within the people, which left them, the people, powerless and at the mercy of these cunning and deceitful leaders. These malicious deceivers are still among you, and through their greed, treachery, and manipulation, they control much of your world, your socio-economically, political, and even geophysically, even this day. In addition to the signs to look for in the words and deeds of others, you must first also recognize the signs of the Antichrist within you. Look at the document, How to Recognize the Antichrist Against God Within You. It's in this journal. Remember this, you ones who are faithful and true. With your sincere commitment to the development and trust of your Holy Spirit within, you will be given the knowledge of truth and the spiritual wisdom of God and the creation in order to sustain you always in balance and service to the oneness of all. 18. You must not commit the act of slavery upon any human being of God. This means you must not demand by force and fear to control, confine, use, or manipulate another human being to do any service or work for you against their will without giving them fair compensation. And this also means that you cannot buy or sell another human being as if he or she were a product that you own. This includes your children. Babies and children are not products to be created such as by in vitro fertilization or given to be birthed by a surrogate mother. If a couple are unable to physically procreate, then they have a choice. They can adopt a homeless or unwanted child, or they can choose not to be parents at all. Adoption of another's unwanted or parentless child is one of the most loving and unselfish acts any competent and caring couple could do in service to God. But not all couples are or were meant to procreate. It is not punishment from God. It is the responsibility of any barren, loving couple to recognize that procreation is not their function at this time. But if they desire children, then they must understand what an honor it is to accept the nurturing care of one of God's children who has no one else to love him or her. And one of the most painful and degrading terms you humans have labeled those children who are born out of wedlock is bastard, which means illegitimate according to human law. You must now know that in God's kingdom there are no bastards. These born out of wedlock children are as precious to God as any other child born with married parents. Then there have been many of you humans who have throughout history claimed superiority or inferiority because of color or race. The feeling a human has of so-called genetic superiority exists within the mind of the human who wishes to control and dominate and enslave other humans of different race or color than he is. For example, Many of the Germans under the one called Hitler believed that the pure Caucasian was far superior genetically, mentally, and physically to all other races. They believed in keeping the race pure, but by not interbreeding with other so-called inferior races. Also, many of the so-called Jews are taught and believe that their race is the chosen of God over all others, and so they believe that they are superior. In America, as in Europe, black or dark humans were believed inferior and were made slaves to the whites. Don't you see the evil powers that be are creating and encouraging prejudice of others who are different than they are in culture and skin so that they can control the perceived lesser ones? Throughout the world, through your media and government policies, a seed of racial unrest, dissension, and prejudice is specifically planted, nurtured, and allowed to bear the fruit of hatred and resentment, and is thus continually perpetuated so that you people will not become united. By keeping you separated, by creating for you suppression of various groups, they keep you at war with one another while they execute their plans for total domination over all of you. And so it is against the laws of God for man and woman of different races or colors to marry and bear children? Of course not. The genetic corruption of your human species occurs specifically because of the disease within the spiritually weak and corrupted beings who procreate not because of their color. Each soul is a fragment of God. And whatever race or color of the body that the soul chooses to incarnate in makes no difference whatsoever to God. Only human falsely chooses to create and delineate features or traits of racial superiority, inferiority. In service to the divine light of wisdom and truth of our Creator ATON and the creation we are, Sananda, Lord Michael, Germain, Druthea. And I'm going to stop there. I didn't want to separate the laws because they are so important. So I wanted to capture it all in one video. And it may be lengthy, but boy, is he telling us exactly what we need to hear. Be sure and share your smile, folks. Hug those that you love because life is short. And do something for one another when they need a hand up. Those are our brothers and sisters. And you've already heard what God tells us about that. There's so much to take in, but it really isn't, because if you've already understood just the words of God from the Bible, then this should be no different. Okay? This should be no different. So, y'all have a wonderful rest of your weekend, and get close to God. Because once you do that, you will never have to want for anything. He tells us, ask, knock, and seek. And you're going to find your answers. And the answers will come within. And that's so special in itself. But people go to other people. People go to their pastors, to their churches, to whatever, to the bar, seeking their answers when it exists right here within. Love you. See you. Bye.